I started with background investigations in Chicago in 1961, and after 5 years was sent to St. Louis, or after 6 months went to St. Louis, and then had Central Illinois for 4 or 5 years, and was transferred to Cuba for my first activity with criminal investigations. And then after 2 years at Gitmo with the family and experiencing the isolation there, that from 66 to 68 was transferred to headquarters, and went into a special operations group of six investigators that we worked under Jack Donnelly and one of the hats that he had at headquarters. And those six investigators had access to every location that we had an office. And it didn't matter the location wise. We had the right, as doing a headquarters origin case. We were able to go into somebody's area and conduct the investigation with or without them. Mm-hmm. And that's how this all came about with regard to one night on a Sunday night, I was grilling steaks at my home in Springfield, Virginia, and Jack Donnelly called me and asked me if I'd like to volunteer for something that he'd love for me to do. And I said, Jack, I'll go anywhere, anytime. I said that when I came on board, and I'm in it. And he said, well, he kind of grasped at something called ice something. And I thought he said Iceland. And I said, sure, I'll go. And the next day I found out it was Ice Island, which is T3. And it's 6 by 3 miles in size. It's 90 feet thick, and it's floating 200 miles from the North Pole. And there's a murder investigation. And I'm sure glad that you and Dick McKenna have volunteered to do this. And I said, how are we getting there? And he says, nobody knows. Oh. And for the next 10 days, we grappled with how to get us and the other two gentlemen that came with us, one a U.S. Coast Guard petty officer who we used to do the at sea arrest of in connection with this case. And that was all that the Coast Guard would allow him to do. And the other was Justin Williams, who talked his way on as if he wanted the experience. He was a bachelor and working at the Eastern District of Virginia courthouse. And he says, you may need me up there if this thing gets hot with regard to whether we have jurisdiction or not on a keg of ice that's floating at 5 miles a day close to the North Pole. So Justin came, and he was a benefit, if nothing else, his guitar music in the mess hall when we had a break. But that's the way it started. But the next 10 days before we could leave, we had a lot of jurisdictional aspects in connection with this case. First of all, I was going to finance it. Everybody that was involved was either government employed, and that would take care of that. The Air Force chipped in with 2 C-130s and 2 H-3 helicopters, and we wound up going from the four of us got in a C-130 at Pease Air Force Base and flew to Thule Air Force Base in Greenland. And that was a briefing period and a resting period. And we got our cold weather outfits there. And then the next morning left for the northern section of Canada, where we got we were in the H-3 helicopter at that time.
So you flew from Pease Air Force Base to Thule Air Force Base in a C-130, and then you switched over to this H-3.
Yeah, then we stayed there overnight.
Okay.
And we had briefings with regard to the two pilots that were coming in from England, because one of them had experience in cold weather air-to-air refuelings. And we were aware that this was the first time it was ever going to be attempted in the Arctic. But remember, it was in late July, and it was the hottest time of the year. The sun never set, and the ice, the temperature of the ice and on top of it was 38 degrees. So it was not cold. It was melting, and the ice was crunching under our boots as we walked within the camp. And that didn't present any particular problems, and we had light all the time, so we could work all night. But the pilots told us that night that the weather was going to be bad in 48 hours, and we needed to get our work done. And we planned out our work from the standpoint of, we knew that we had a dead body that was frozen and under ice. We knew that the suspect had been removed from any duties and was essentially staying in his hut for the 10 days that it took us to get there, and that everybody was anxiously waiting for us to come so that we could remove those two people and they could get on with their work.
Jiggs, so I have a question about this. So when you guys were taking this flight, I read in one of your documents that you overheard a conversation between the pilot, and they said that this H3, you gotta literally gun it just so the C-130 was having a hard time, leading the H3 because it was flying slow.
Yeah, that was kind of a suck up time. Both Dick and I had on our I don't know if this is going to show or not.
There you go. They're at Thule, and there you guys are on the H3.
Yeah, we're on the H3, and we have our earphones on, and we're hearing the two chopper guys saying, "Are we ready?" And they said, "We're going to take on fuel." And then we see this cord coming out of the H-130 or the C-130, and the spike goes out, and it's trying to fish itself into the
basket.
The basket, and we're really close. And I said, "How close are we?" And he says, "At sometimes we're within 10 to 20 feet of the blades hitting the fuel line. We got to be very careful and understand that the helicopter had to be full speed, and the C-130 had to be going as slow as it could stay in the air. But it worked, and within 90 seconds, we had a full load. He pulled away. And Dick and I looked at each other and kind of wiped our brow and said, "Hey, it worked the first time." And then the next thing we hear is the pilot saying, "George, you never done one of these, have you?" He says, "No." He says, "You're doing one now." And we said, "What? You're practicing on us?" And he says, "Yeah." He says, "I could have a heart attack and you'd all be dead. Take over, George. You do the next one."
Wow.
It reminded me of a doctor coming into my to one of my operations I had on my abdomen, and he talked to the other doctor, and he says, "Have you ever done one of these before?" And they were going to insert a permanent IV in me. He says, "No, I've never done one." Is you ever watched one? He says, "Yeah, I've watched one." He says, "You know what they tell us in medical school? You watch one, you do one, and then you teach one." And he says, "That's where I'm in. I'm a teaching session."
Well, you were involved in the very first Arctic refuel.
The very first ever in July 1970 of anybody even trying an Arctic refueling of an H-3 helicopter.
Wow.
In the Arctic Circle. Yeah.
The Arctic Circle.
In the Arctic Circle, yeah.
Wow.
But anyway, that went well, and then we were so tired at the time we got to T3, it didn't matter. They hooked up, he got gas, brought us down, we got off, and we had 36 hours from then to conduct the investigation, try to get everything together, collect the evidence, and get back on our way.
So this
And,
is really interesting because, you know, the C-130 has to go back to what, Alert, Canada? Is that where they stayed and waited?
They were an Alert, and that's where the chopper waited for us.
Okay.
And so the with I guess it was about sometime in late afternoon that we started, and we went systematically through the process of looking at checking the body and making sure everything was locked up well, and that they had done a good job. And
okay.
I'm thankful for the station manager at Point Barrow. He was right on top of it. His name was Britton, and he was in charge of the Naval Arctic Research Laboratory at the Office of Naval Research in Point Barrow, Alaska. And he was the director of that program. And boy, he took charge over ham radio that night of having everything done properly with regard to the establishment of saving of the evidence and separating people and telling people that they couldn't talk about this with each other. And so we walked into a fairly good situation. But
that was really interesting, Jiggs, because it was either you wrote in a document sent to me or in one of the articles that I read that the ham radio, when he radioed, because there was no other way they could communicate, that ham radio call was made to somebody in, like, I mean, really far away, South America, or I'm not sure where it was, but it was nowhere near the Arctic Circle.
No, and they rerouted them to a doctor on a May Day. A doctor picked up in New Orleans.
Oh, okay.
And at that time, Lightsey was still alive. They still had heartbeat, but he didn't last more than 35 minutes. But that doctor told them how to do mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, and they tried that, but he eventually was. The doctor led him through 3 or 4 things that says, no, he's passed away. Sorry, can't help you anymore. And so then they had his dead body on the floor of the place where he slept. And earlier, about 30 minutes before that, Perotti, who was involved in the making of the wine, saw Escamilla with the gun, pointing it at him and saying, "No, you're not getting any more booze for Porgy. He about killed me a week ago," and that all came out after the fact. But
so
because of that, we knew what had happened.
Sure.
And then we began with interviewing witnesses, and Dick did the crime scene, and I took statements, and we went from there.
So you had when you arrived in the helicopter, you guys jump off the helicopter with all your equipment. So when I joined the Naval Investigative Service in 1989, our typical crime scene kit was a briefcase, packed with, plastic bags, paper bags, your evidence tape, was that similar kind of equipment you guys had?
We had stuffed everything we thought we needed in a satchel, knowing that we had to keep baggage to a minimum. And we had 2 other guys that were with us that were just carrying a backpack. So they were helpful in helping us get the equipment off, but that wasn't a problem. And as soon as we got on the ice, we had people there to help us carry stuff in.
So when you guys, the helicopter is just hovering above the ice, and you guys
jumped
off the helicopter?
It didn't turn off. It had skids on it. It was on the top of the ice, so that wouldn't go in. But they were happy to say goodbye to us and say, "See you in a day and a half. You better be ready to go, because we're not going to turn this engine off. We don't know it's going to start again." But then when they came back in a day and a half, they did turn the engine off with the possible oil leak.
Oh my gosh. So Bill Stevens meets you guys, and you go to the, what was your first impressions of the facility there at Ice Island?
Well,
Pictures.
I was not really surprised. I was expecting it to be. I noticed that that Dick said that was shocking. I don't know that he would have said that because it looked like the way you'd have a base on ice, and they used a 55-gallon barrel as a place to defecate. But when they built that, they put a cabin over the top so it'd be warmer in there. But then the ice would melt at this time of the year. The ice would melt around it, and they'd have to keep chipping away steps to get up into it because the cover for it protected it. So you could see how much melting there was on the surface ice.
Wow.
And then that was one of the interesting part about it. You think, well, how do they get rid of this? Once they want to change the 55-gallon drum, what do? We just pull it down, wait until the ice is frozen, and take it out 200 yards, drill a hole, put it down. And I said, how long have you been doing that? They said, for years. And I says, what happens when the ice melts? He said, well, every once in a while you hear a pop. And then
That's great.
Yeah, none of the aircraft that come in want to take it out. So I don't think EPA would have liked that.
Oh, that's very good. That's humorous. So so you guys go to the facility. What's your first thoughts? Did you guys strategize before you got there how we're going
and we ironed that out specifically as to duties, and worked together for a little, whatever he felt we needed. I helped him with the crime scene, but then he could use one of the other people there that was willing to help us with regard to measurements and everything. And then we'd talk and we'd see what we had. And, even from the get-go, I got the feeling that there had been 10 days since the incident occurred. And that was long enough time to realize that these people aren't going to hurt each other. It was not a crime that there was sides being taken or vengeance in evidence, and everybody was cooperative as much as they could be. Some didn't want to get involved, and but anybody that was close to the whole situation leading up to it, we got statements from them, and we were relatively finished. Allowed 3 hours at the end for interview of the suspect, and he turned us down right away, asked for an attorney, and we didn't get anything out of him, which others told us that he's not going to talk to you because he won't talk to any of us either. And that was pretty much it for the next day and a half, and we were pretty exhausted when we were being, and the weather was coming in. We needed to get out when we did, and get it would have been perhaps days, if not weeks, to get out if we'd have waited for another 24 hours.
Got out there just in time. So this apprehension of Escamilla occurred. The Coast Guard petty officer did his work conducting the apprehension. Tell me what that was like. As you guys were, was there any conversation, anything other than him being apprehended and put him on the aircraft?
Nope, it was a 5 to 10 minute operation. It was an introduction. Frank spent all of his time playing pool and playing the guitar and having a good time in the mess hall, and they were all very happy to have somebody from the States come in because they had all arrived on the 1st of June, and here it was the end of July, and they hadn't seen anybody, and they weren't going to see any other human being until 1 October. They couldn't get off, and they were trying to buy a ticket back with us, but that wasn't going to occur. But Frank, we just let him into where we had Mario, and we introduced the two of them, and had him stand, and Frank said that, here are my credentials. I'm a U.S. Coast Guard investigator, and I hereby arrest you for homicide on Ice Island. Do you understand? And he said, yes. And he said, sign here. And that was it. And from that time on, Frank did testify in court to that effect with regard to the arrest at sea for an American citizen for homicide. And they kept that, the FBI kept that in the court action later. That was in the end of September. And I think by the end of October was when the court decided that he was guilty of manslaughter, and he was going to serve 4 years. And they took him off from court and put him in prison in Alexandria. Mm-hmm. And they immediately appealed it, but it was probably 3 months before the appeal came through, mm-hmm. in which they did. By that time, the FBI had finished the investigation on the weapon, mm-hmm. because they claimed he apparently admitted to his defense people. He said, I don't know why the weapon, we've heard that later. He says, I don't know why it went off. I was shaken so much, mm-hmm. that it did go off. And that's why afterwards I admitted that I shot him. Yeah. And that's the first thing he said after the incident occurred. And
well, let me ask you this, Jiggs. When I was reading through the documents on this thing, when Letzi went to retrieve the wine or retrieve the weapon from Escamilla, was there a confrontation between the two? Because I'm just trying to say, was there a motive for him to kill Letzi?
For Escamilla to kill Letzi? No. Uh-huh. The only motive he had is that Letzi had a good relationship with him, and I think he probably told him, hey, put the weapon down. You know, we're friends here. Yeah. And he says, no. He says, I'm serious. I do not, under any circumstances, want to be around Porky when he's drinking, and you're now going to give him more wine for the party, and I can't have you do that. Mm-hmm. And it was within, by that time, Perotti had left to take somebody else back to their apartment, to their hooch, mm-hmm. And he had seen through the doorway that this was happening, but he was concerned about it, and is so concerned that he was telling other people, stay away from that. And then all of a sudden there was the gun went off. Oh, and then when Perotti walked in, he said, what's happening? And they quickly tried to bring Letzi back to life. Mm-hmm. That's when he explained that. He said, I shot him. Mm-hmm. And but he was emotional and sat down, and it went from there.
Did Letzi make any final statements before he died that could have backed up Escamilla's story?
No, he was shot near the heart on the left-hand side, near his left breast. Bullet went through his body. We found it in the wall. Mm-hmm. So he was incapacitated from the time he got hit. Hmm.
So you guys, so in court, so he goes through this process, he gets convicted of manslaughter, but then there's the appeals that goes through, talking about, as you mentioned, his story about, I don't know how I was shaking so badly, the rifle went off. Talk a little bit about that as far as the appeals process.
I was not involved in that, and never got called for any kind of testimony. Dick did on one occasion. Mm-hmm. But since we had not had any capability or time to investigate the weapon while it was there, mm-hmm. that was the very last thing we did, was to accumulate that with the body just before the pilot was coming in. We didn't have any equipment to do it, so we, other than to see that the weapon was there. So we did. I didn't touch it. I didn't unwrap it. They wrapped it in a sheet and a blanket and tied it up and put it beside the stretcher with the body. So when we processed the body the night before, and we observed the fact that the bullet had gone all the way through his body, and that they had cleaned up his body. In fact, I had a shot of his chest. I took a picture of his chest with his shirt open. But other than that, there was no further action by us or until the FBI got the body.
Right. So when Dick did the crime scene, I'm sure he had he may have talked to some people that talked a little bit how it happened. So did he determine, based on the wounds, the injuries on the victim, was it a contact wound or was it a close range shot?
Yeah, it appeared to be a close range shot within, I would say within 3 feet.
Interesting.
They were close. It was confined living conditions. So, but there wasn't any question about him getting hit with it. He didn't have to aim it. It was easy to see, and but there were no marks on the body to show that there was any contact wound. It was,
what's interesting about this is we talked this a little bit before the interview started, was had Escamilla talked to you guys in some fashion before this may have been worked out before any of these issues had to go to court, because
you're exactly right. And I think they had enough written evidence shortly after the fact that this Briton I was telling you about got some of the statements. So he was trying to get a motive, and none of them had any motive. They were friends, and they liked Mario, and they liked Escamilla. Escamilla liked them. There was no evidence of animosity or ill feeling. It was just this one incident the week before that triggered him to say, I don't want to go through that again. I don't want to be running away from this guy with the knife that's following me around when he's intoxicated. So that triggered him, and he admitted even during that week he went to Escamilla, he went to Stevens and said, we got to do something about this. But then again, he was the one that made the liquor. He was the one that had it. It was a raisin wine, and they had 15 gallons of it, and at the time they made it, and they were hold that in a different location, and Chuck Perotti and Escamilla were in charge of it.
It's interesting because when I was reading or looking at some other documents as far as this case being so unique, and it's interesting because there's a couple of things that I think is really interesting about this, that other than the crime scene and the investigation, because I think you guys did a fantastic job on it. It's exactly how we do things still today. There's a lot of tools that we have that you didn't have back in those days, but what you did was exactly like Prince always says, a carrier agent. When I had a death on board the ship, sometimes you got to do everything. You got to be the jack of all trades. You got to do the sketch, you got to do the photography, you got to do, the documentation of the scene, you got to do the interviews, and, and sometimes if you're lucky, you might have an investigator from the Navy to help you out. You guys did a fantastic job in really interesting and treacherous conditions. You got 36 hours, you finish it up in 34 hours when the aircraft arrives, and you within 2 hours, you got to get off of that place, right? And get back to the US.
We were happy to, and we were exhausted because we hadn't had any rest at all. And there was pressure, but we did what we felt like was necessary to do. And the Bureau came back to us and didn't find, any problems with them passing the evidence over to them, and everything went smoothly in the court, except they could not get the witnesses to leave Ice Island during the trial because there was no way to get them back. And,
They were smarter than y'all. They're not going to get on a helicopter and fly back. No way.
no,
But so there's one other really interesting aspect of this case. So you guys fly the suspect back to Thule Air Force Base in Greenland. Talk about that aspect of it, because we talk about the jurisdictional issues. Canada, it kind of waived jurisdiction, and but what happened with Denmark as far as when you guys were flying into Thule?
well, we had alerted the OSI to meet us at the plane and to help us escort him into their brig so that we could take him directly there and feed him, and he'd have a place overnight. So we got in there 1800, and we were finished with him by 1900, and by that time he was taken care of for the night. The next morning we get him at 0600 to get out by 0730 before they open up, and that was all laid on before the fact. So at that point we were finished with the helicopter, said goodbye to the helicopter, and we were waiting for the 1:30 to let us know that all four of us can beat it out of there by 0730, and we did, and we flew directly to Dulles, and we got in there by 11:30, 12 o'clock. And that's where the marshals came in, and then FBI came in, and were able to say goodbye to him. And
that landing in Thule was a strategic move, because it allowed Denmark to have plausible deniability of the suspect.
Perfect. That had to be all under the table, because that would have really put a damper in any kind of prosecution. They wouldn't have known what to do with it. It would have been wound up in world court for a long time. And that can happen to it. So the two State Departments in Washington worked that out, and the Air Force cooperated. The district prosecution people were wonderful. Justin Williams later became the head lawyer there, and at 61, unfortunately passed away after he was running. He was an active runner, and on one Sunday he passed out and had a heart attack there. I don't know what happened to Frank Love. McKenna died about 8 years ago of cancer. So I think you're probably right. The witnesses were 10 years younger than we were. So it's possible that one of those witnesses that was there will still have remembrance of the situation, but not have the details. Nobody else that I know of, everybody else that was older than me, if they were 10 years older, they'd be over 100 now. So that's gone forever.
Well, I'm so glad that we had the opportunity to talk about this very interesting and fascinating case that is one of those kind that stays with you forever, for sure. And it's funny. One other thing I want to mention was that by going to the North Pole, if you will, or to the Arctic Circle, you earned your Order of the Blue Nose. Which I think is pretty cool. As a shellback, the Navy has all kinds of traditions, and one of those is any sailor that goes into the Arctic Circle, and there's several things you have to do, but you earn your Order of the Blue Nose fraternity membership. So how does that feel to be a member of that very unique and small group?
I didn't know about it before. It was a surprise when we both were awarded that by the Coast Guard with regard to actively participating in an investigation inside the Arctic Circle. And I've got it appropriately framed in my living room. It's it's kind of wonderful. Let me see if I've got. This was my Eastern District of Virginia courtroom. 10th day. 10th of December was the court action for subpoena was issued on the 29th of September 1970. So the last court action on him was in December for this offense, and then the 4 years started, and then within a year the FBI, as soon as they realized, hey, this weapon is bad, we shouldn't even have prosecuted him because of the question about the weapon. And here's some of his Dick's pictures.
Oh wow! Crime scene photographs.
Yeah, that he took crime scene photographs, and this you can't see this, but in the middle is the North Pole of this one. This is
you were about that time. You were about 240 to 300 miles off, close to the North Pole. Look at that.
This is what you go through. We went through 4 times for the refueling, and you can see that over ice is a little scary.
Oh, it looks like it.
See the spike,
the rotor blade so close to that fuel lines.
Yeah, you see that spike coming out of the H-3 helicopter.
Oh yeah,
going into the basket.
Yeah. Wow.
And we were sitting right behind the pilot when we heard that.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of NCIS Reports from Field. We look back at our interview with retired Special Agent Jiggs Kaliher and his amazing story of traveling to the top of the world to conduct a death investigation with Dick McKenna. NCIS agents and their counterparts in the DoD have to be prepared to go anywhere in the world to conduct criminal investigations, whether it's in the jungles, the desert, or even the North Pole. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I'm Lee Clements, and we'll see you next time on NCIS Reports from the Field.